So again, there are some overwhelms that can be good for you. There's constructive and destructive. So make sure they're constructive. And if they're destructive, do your best to get through them and then focus on how to improve or avoid next time.
None of us can do it all. You can do anything you set your mind to within reason over the long term, but you can't do everything. None of us can be everything for everyone all the time.
Next Level Nation, welcome back to another very special, as always, weekly Next Level You live podcast for week number 94. It is very appropriate because Alan and I are currently dealing with this. We are going to speak about dealing with overwhelm. For those of you who missed the intro, I slightly jeffed Alan with a loving but not serious joke. I figured I'd throw that out there. I don't want anybody to think I was throwing smoke at you.
Oh, I appreciate it, brother.
It was a good one. It was a good joke.
Are we ready to rock?
Yeah, I'm ready to rock.
Do this thing.
Yeah.
So the thing I want to say before we dive into the dealing with overwhelm. 2022 for us, this is the first year where we have all of the trains rolling all simultaneously. And so 1 episode per day, 1 live podcast per week, 1 group coaching bi-weekly, but new group every quarter, 1 monthly Next Level virtual event every month, 1 Next Level live event every quarter, and then 1 annual retreat every year. And so to say that Kevin and I are dealing with some overwhelm in 2022, including our team as well, our team is quite overwhelmed as well, is an absolute understatement. And so my goal here today is to just be vulnerable and talk about the truth behind the curtain of how challenging it is for, it all sounds really shiny to do all those things. And 2022 is going to be incredible and very successful. But on the day-to-day, it's nothing short of overwhelming.
It definitely is. And one of the things we'll talk about, I have a point to this, that what overwhelms you now, hopefully the goal is in the future that will become your new walking pace. When you're in an all-out sprint and you're thinking, this is not sustainable, I cannot do this for a long period of time, hopefully in the future that will be something that is just relatively simple, and that does come with time. I had a client I was talking to recently, and I said, why don't we try to get you more clients? I think that's an important part of your business. Your business is set up that way. You have a lot of listeners who would really, really benefit from being coached by you. And she said, Kev, I can't take on clients right now. I'm so overwhelmed. And I said, okay, I understand that. I have a bunch of clients. Alan has a bunch of clients. Tell me more. Tell me about what you're doing on the day-to-day that is creating such an overwhelm for you. And I just sat there. And she said, okay, let me think about it for a second. And then she came back and said, well, I create a bunch of content. I'm doing interviews. I have some coaching calls. And I said, all right, cool. How long does that take you? And she's like, well, if I do an interview, it's about an hour. I maybe create 2 hours of content. And if I do a coaching call, it's an hour. And I said, all right, that's not that much time. That's not that much time. I think you're probably working this overwhelm thing in your head more than it actually is real. I wanted to help her find clarity. I wanted her to define overwhelm. What is the actual overwhelm? I'm convinced, for me at least, this is what I've found. Overwhelm is either too many things, not enough clarity, not enough time, or unmeasured pressure. And it could be a bunch of different things. But if you don't find clarity and take a step back for a second and figure out, okay, why am I actually overwhelmed? Am I trying to do something that I just don't know how to do? And that uncertainty feels overwhelming to me. Am I under a strict deadline and I'm very, very nervous I'm not going to be able to get it done? So every time I think of taking new action, I freak out because I know I'm against the clock. I always say this, and I always am the one to go first when we do these. I think awareness is the first step. You have to understand, why are you actually overwhelmed, and what does overwhelm mean to you? I think it means something different to everybody. If you're a parent out there, your definition of overwhelm is probably different than mine. I have a client who's a stay-at-home mom, and she has a podcast, and she has several kids, and she has a business, and she has another business. That level of overwhelm is different than my level of overwhelm. So I think you have to first define it, and then after you have the definition, you can kind of figure out where to go from there.
Kev, what didn't you understand about Overwhelm before we started this podcast journey versus now?
The biggest thing is that you can grow into it. So I would say the biggest thing I have learned is overwhelm isn't always bad. If you think about getting stronger in the gym, how do you get stronger? You get stronger by overwhelming your muscles, just not enough to the point where they get broken. So that would be it for me. I wouldn't say avoid overwhelm. I would say avoid debilitating overwhelm. Overwhelm isn't a bad thing. You can up-level your resilience, your skills, all those.
It wasn't long ago, Kevin and I, in group coaching, we showed our calendar. At the time, I think it was early January. And we showed our calendar in 2022, which was now, my calendar. Then we showed it in 2021. Then we showed it in 2020. Then we showed it in 2019. And then eventually 2018. All January. And it was drastically different. It became it became very apparent that Kevin and I have really leveled up the amount in which we can handle in a given week in terms of productivity. So we just realized this today because we were prepping for this. And I found out that between relationship talks, between my business coaching, between the NLU team and group coaching, we just added it up prior to this speech here, this live podcast, 53 people. And I thought back to, first of all, I said, Kev, no wonder why I'm overwhelmed. It's a lot. And I'm trying to figure out how to play at this new level. And again, that goes to what Kevin said about stretch yourself, but don't injure yourself. And so I'm trying to do that as well. But that means that on some level, group coaching, I'm not as intimately involved with, but that's biweekly. And then all my clients are biweekly. And now the NLU team is on biweekly coaching as well. And then relationship talks is also biweekly with a few exceptions. But that means that I'm in some capacity involved in the lives of 53 individuals to where I'm trying to help them become more fulfilled and more successful. And it is very, very overwhelming. And I remember what it was like to have just one client. Amy, she's behind the scenes right now. She was my very first client. She was my first fitness client. And I only had one at the time. We were doing, I think, maybe an episode a week, maybe 2 episodes a week. And I remember even that in some ways was overwhelming because it was brand new. And so here I am now with 53 clients from all different industries, all different countries, all different backgrounds, all different ethnicities. And I'm trying to help guide them all to get back in alignment with their highest self and their greatest level of contribution. But I'm definitely overwhelmed. And that's why I capped my business coaching at only 20 clients. And now I have a waiting list. But relationship talks has grown a lot quicker than I anticipated as well, which is awesome. But it's overwhelming. And so the first point here for me is batching is everything. I open WhatsApp. So every single team member, every single client, every single relationship talks person, group coaching, they're all, our business uses WhatsApp for our communication. And I opened my WhatsApp this morning and I got very overwhelmed because there's probably 120 or so messages in there that I have not yet responded to. And it gets really overwhelming because the moment I respond, then those responses get responses. And so recently, Amy, fortunately, she's my assistant and my executive admin, and she helps me so much. And now she's in many of those WhatsApp groups, combing them for things that need my attention. And so I took a lot of things that might overwhelm me and then boiled it down to just a couple texts from Amy for things that are really urgent and really important. And that's my next point that we'll get to. But here's my point. If you're not batching your texts, if you're not batching your emails, if you're not batching your WhatsApp messages, if you're not batching your Facebook messages and your LinkedIn DMs and your Instagram DMs, the more and more successful you become, the more and more you're going to get overwhelmed, and the less and less you're going to be able to grow. The less and less you're going to be able to grow your business. And I use this often, but I say this in book club. There's a reason why all of us can't get a hold of Jay Shetty right now. It's not because Jay Shetty's not an amazing person. It's not because Jay Shetty doesn't want to help people. It's because if Jay Shetty had an open door or open window of communication with everyone in the world, he would be in a constant state of overwhelm. And so for you, what level do you play at in this? And are you setting up systems to where you batch? For me, on my peak performance tracker, I have batch WhatsApp and batch email once per day. And that's on top of Amy helping me as well. And so if you want to deal with overwhelm more effectively, you got to get support and you have to batch.
Alan, how do you differentiate between a stretch and a snap when it comes to overwhelm? In the gym, it's easy because there's numbers on the weights and you can say, oh, I lifted this last time, I can probably lift this. But when it comes to tasks and attention and energy and focus, it's harder to measure.
It's so much harder to measure. I'll be transparent. I don't think I'm great at measuring it. I tend to burn out or burn down for a short time, and then I realize I can't keep operating this way. Mm-hmm. So I tend to be someone who overdoes it, and then unfortunately I'll give you an example. So it was recently we were on the whiteboard, Emilia and I, and we were doing this new Evolve score because her new brand is Evolve Ventures, and there's a growth rate score of all these different character traits. Kevin and I went through it today, and I couldn't remember something, and Emilia's like, "Are you okay? Like, what's going on?" Like, normally I have a really, really, really good memory. I can see movies once or twice, and I can remember the lines from them. And I told her, I said, I'm just really spread thin lately. I'm really overwhelmed. So full transparency, I'm not great at determining in advance when I'm overwhelmed because I tend to push things really, really hard. I think that some people pump the brakes too quickly when they get scared of being overwhelmed. And I think they really should stretch themselves and push themselves harder. You can always go farther than you think you can. In the gym, that's a good thing too. Almost always, unless you have a ton of weight on there, you can usually go past when it's painful. So I think understand yourself and try to be proactive in the self-awareness piece of, am I someone who tends to stretch so far till I snap, or am I someone who tends to pump the brakes too quickly? If you pump the brakes too quickly, you're never going to grow. If you always snap, you're going to be out of the gym in this analogy, and that's not good for growth either.
And you always learn. The more you do it, the more you learn. That's one thing I've learned is at the beginning of this, there were things that Amy and I were joking. I was like, I think I only have 2 calls tomorrow. And she's like, oh, that's a rough one, huh? And I said, 3 years ago, that would have been it. That would have been the entire day. So overwhelm changes as you change. I've told many stories about when I was in the fire academy. I have a couple stories I've never told. When I signed up as a volunteer firefighter, one of the first things we did was we had to go to this class. And I think it might have been Tuesdays and Thursdays for like 4 months. And so there was in class where you sat and learned through a textbook or PowerPoint presentations, and there were captains and chiefs who taught you, or there were practical days. So one of the practical days, we got to go use the jaws of life and cut open cars and flip cars over and practice with the jaws of life and the airbags. That was awesome. But the first practical thing we ever did, we showed up to a firehouse and we went down in the bay, in the garage where the trucks were, and we had to do what is called donning and doffing of your gear. So donning is putting on, doffing is taking off your gear. I don't know why they add the D to it, but that's what it's considered in the fire services. And the person, I don't remember who it was. I think it was the chief of that department. He said, okay, you all have to do this in under a minute. And for those of you who don't know, as a firefighter, you have heavy, heavy, heavy pants that are overalls, and they have straps that go over your shoulder. You have very heavy boots. You have a jacket. You have a hood. You have a mask. You have oxygen. You have a helmet. You have an air tank. You have heavy, heavy gloves. You have a lot of different equipment. And when the timer went off, it is the most overwhelming thing ever, especially when you've never done it before and this is your first time doing it. So I remember trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to do this in under a minute, and am I going to be the last person to get done? What you have to do is you have to take things one step at a time. You have to take it one thing at a time. You can't put both of your gloves on at the same time. You can only put one on. So it's you run over, you put one foot in your pants, the other foot, pull your pants up and jump, throw the overalls over, throw your boots on. Then I think you throw your hood, your fire hood on, then your jacket. Actually, you have to do all this with your gloves on, which is a giant pain. But when you get to the end of it, you know, I only have 15 seconds left. That's when people start to make mistakes because they're very, very overwhelmed. So the point I'm making here is take things one step at a time. If you think of, okay, I have 55 things I have to get done today, you might put yourself so far into analysis that you're not going to do anything. Another time, before I was in the fire academy and I was a foreman for the construction company I used to work for, we got this really, really big contract in Newport News, Virginia. And at the time, I lived in New Hampshire, 10 minutes down the road from where I live now. And I remember my boss said, hey, Kevin, you're going to be the foreman on this. You're going to run this entire job. This was the biggest job we had ever had in the company. It was 100 and something buildings. I was in Virginia for 3 months, but it was brutal. There was so many binders and I had so many phone calls, but I tried to take it one step at a time. I tried to take it one building, one day, one piece of paper, one project, one employee that was working under me at a time. And I think we complicate things by trying to take on too much at once, when in reality, it's always going to be there. So really take a step back, take one thing at a time, focus on that one thing, and make sure you get that 100% done so you can move on to the next thing. And then just to piggyback on what Alan and I said before, that fire academy was a good stretch. That Overwhelm was good. That job Overwhelm was good. It provided me opportunities. It provided me skills that I still use to this day. So again, there are some overwhelms that can be good for you. There's constructive and destructive. So make sure they're constructive. And if they're destructive, do your best to get through them and then focus on how to improve or avoid next time.
Fire. There's a lot of neuroscience about single tasking versus multitasking as well. And single tasking is definitely a far more productive way to operate for the most part, except for extenuating circumstances. So to piggyback on what Kevin just said, you know, waking up in the morning with 50 things to do can be so overwhelming. And this morning I woke up and I have this system that I do. So there's 3 things that I do first thing in the morning. So the first thing that I do in the morning is I write my book, 3 paragraphs minimum. Sometimes I go a little farther than that. The second is I do a lesson and a story, which is what's a lesson that I learned this week and what's the story behind why I learned that lesson. And then the third thing is I do something that I'm now referring to as the 4 quadrants, and something I refer to as my 0.04% essentials. There's some math behind why I call it a 0.04% essential, but the 4 quadrants is what I want to talk about here. So I woke up this morning and I had probably around 50 things to do. But I opened my Remarkable, which is right here in front of me. It's a notebook, electronic notebook. And there's a line down the center and a line across the page. And so there's 4 quadrants: upper right, upper left, bottom right. In the upper right quadrant are all the things that I deem urgent and important. In the upper left quadrant are all the things that I deem very important, but not necessarily urgent. Writing my book would be an example of that because it's not being published for a long time, but it's very important, just not urgent. Bottom right is things that are not important and that are urgent but not important. That could be WhatsApp messages, that could be text messages, that could be emails. They seem urgent, they seem like people want your attention right away, maybe a calendar change or something like that, but they're not necessarily your most important work. And this is the frame, by the way. Is this my life's work? See, my book, I want to be a piece of my life's work versus answering a WhatsApp message isn't my life's work, unless it's coaching, in which case, of course, it is. And then the bottom left quadrant is neither, meaning this is not important, this is not urgent. Scrolling on Instagram, for example. I actually put an X on that quadrant. I don't allow any tasks on my list that are neither urgent nor important. So here's what I do. Instead of waking up in the morning and having 50 things I'm going to do today, I have 5. And I take the upper right quadrant, which are things that are urgent and important, and I choose 5 of them. And then I put them on a new page, clean page, 1 through 5 in order of most importance, and I do what's referred to as top 5, 1 of 5. So I choose the top one and I work on that. This is a way to make sure and have peace of mind, and this is what I wrote down, using using the 4 quadrants, that's another point. Using the 4 quadrants give you clarity on what's actually important, so then you have the peace of mind of knowing that you're doing your most important work. The truth here is, and Greg McKeon talks about this in Essentialism, none of us can do it all. You can do anything you set your mind to within reason over the long term, but you can't do everything. None of us can be everything for everyone all the time, especially not nowadays. We have a global business. There's no way that I can be available to everyone all the time. So when you wake up in the morning, try to have a system. The 4 quadrants works for me. Whatever your system is, it needs to take all the trivial many and it needs to help you boil them down to the vital few so that you don't constantly live in a state of rushing around, and so you don't mistake movement and running around for actual achievement and progress.
We just did an episode on that. Don't mistake movement for achievement. I don't know what episode it was, but we did an episode on it.
Hi there. This is Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and I am the host of the Business of Happiness podcast, which would not be in existence were it not for the one and only incredible Kevin Palmieri. Seriously, I am so indebted to Kevin for the service that he provides. Every week he meets with me. He has been coaching me on how to initiate and launch this podcast. He helped me put it together with his great expertise, and every week his whole team works tirelessly to get these podcasts uploaded to Buzzsprout and to deliver my content to my audience. I am so grateful. I couldn't say enough about him. In fact, we've been working together so well. I've seen so much wonderful input from my listeners and asking me for more that in just a few weeks we're going to be doubling the number of podcasts we produce per week. So this trajectory is just flying, and I'm really enjoying the whole process. So I couldn't say enough about him. Please, if this is something you're considering, I highly recommend him. And reach out to me anytime if you have any questions about our experience. Good luck. Bye-bye.
So as you know, Alan and I are hosting an event March 26th. You can see it below. I am very happy because it's in Worcester, Massachusetts, and that does not require me to get on a plane. But Alan, myself, Bianca, and Emilia were in Florida recently, and Bianca is not a fan of planes, very similar to myself. And on the ride home, her and I sat next to each other. And I think the flight got delayed, and we ended up, it wasn't an overnight, actually it was an overnight flight, I think. And it might only be 3 hours from where we were, but I think we took off at like 10. And I think we got back at like 2 or 3. I don't even remember, but it was brutal. And we're probably 45 minutes away from descending. And we started hitting this really, really, really bad turbulence. And I had my arm on the armrest, and Bianca grabbed my arm. And she was super, super, super nervous. And I remember this is what I've been doing on planes, and I'll connect it to Overwhelm here in a second. I pretend that there's somebody next to me who's more afraid than I am. And the reason I do that is because it allows me to step outside of what I'm thinking of and give myself rational advice. So I literally put my hand on B's hand and I said, B, it's fine. I said, these planes, you can almost bend the wings all the way up. The amount of turbulence it would take to take this thing down is unreasonable. Like, we're going to be fine, I promise. And her and I chatted about it, and there were some more bumps, and she was definitely nervous, and I was definitely nervous. But I was able to take myself out of that overwhelm, out of that anxiety, and put myself into a position to help somebody else. Now, how does this affect overwhelm? What do you do with this? You have to, a couple things. Number one, take a step out. So take yourself out of the frame and look at the overall, because you're going to get clear. Okay, is this even something I should be overwhelmed about? Am I wasting energy on something that doesn't really matter? Is it essential? Is it non-essential? Is it urgent? Is it non-urgent? And then the second part is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Think of it like a sprint. If I said you have to sprint from here to the other side of the office, that's way easier because there's a light at the end of the sprint than saying you're just going to sprint forever. So find the light at the end of the tunnel. I remember 4 years ago when I was working that old job, my buddy Matt, I lived with him in Worcester, and we were renovating. He was renovating the upstairs. But every single weekend, every free moment I had that I wasn't at the gym, I was helping Matt. And it was unreasonably overwhelming traveling 5 days a week, working 2 days a week upstairs, doing construction and carpentry and whatever had to get done. But I always thought to myself, this is temporary and there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And when we finished that, we looked back and it was, again, a great stretch opportunity. It was very hard work. It was difficult, but we proved to ourselves that we were capable of doing it. So try your best, and I understand it's difficult, to take a step out of the frame and really look down and think, what advice would I give somebody else going through this overwhelm? Is there anything simple that maybe I missed? Am I freaking out over stuff that I shouldn't be freaking out about? Is this just the way I process things? Is this my conditioning? Be honest with yourself. Try to get a way out of it. Like, try to take yourself out of the picture and just give a completely random view of it. If Alan came to me and said, hey man, I'm dealing with these things, I wouldn't think about myself. I would say, okay, you have these 5 things going on. This is what I would suggest. And if you can do that for yourself, you're going to be way better off. I understand it's hard because we personalize things, but if you can take a step out, you'll be way better.
So this next one, this is again about dealing with overwhelm and all the ways in which you can overcome that. And the first thing to understand too, and we didn't mention this yet, but everyone is overwhelmed to some extent. There's no one that I coach of the 53 people that I coach. There's no one I can think of that doesn't struggle with this. So you're not alone. It's just to what extent. So we titled this Dealing with Overwhelm for a reason, because everyone deals with it. There's no one who wakes up in the morning and doesn't have any overwhelm whatsoever with the chores or with their fitness goals or with their business or with their family or with their kids or with their pets. Like there's always more to be done. And I told Kevin this early on in our journey. I said, Kev, just so you're aware, it was when we first started creating the NLU team. I said there's never going to be less demand, less work than what we need. So there's never going to be a time where we don't need more team members. There's never going to be a time where we're like, okay, we're good now. That's not real. That's like saying, I don't have to work out anymore and I'm going to stay in shape. And so what you have to understand is that everyone's dealing with this. You're not alone, and I want to be very transparent about that. One of the ways that you can learn how to be more effective with dealing with overwhelm is using a calendar. And for anyone out there, I wanted to use an example of an intimate relationship because with Emilia, when we first got together 2 years ago, a little more than 2 years ago now, she was the first intimate partner who we used a calendar for every time we hung out. She was far ahead of me in terms of her calendar acumen. She uses a calendar for absolutely everything because she's extremely proactive. She is very intentional. She has massive goals and she has to optimize. And she would be in constant overwhelm if she didn't use the tool of a calendar. And so if you've ever missed your intimate partner or wondered, lived in uncertainty, overwhelm is basically just uncertainty. Too much uncertainty in a small amount of time. So at the beginning of COVID, think about how overwhelming it was when no one knew what was going on. It was too much uncertainty in too short of amount of time. So if you've ever been in an intimate relationship and you've ever had that uncertainty of like, when are we going to hang out again? When are they going to text me? When are they going to call me? Or when is the next time we're going to go on a date? A calendar solves that. And so Emilia and I never have that uncertainty of like, are we going to go to the gym together or no? Are we going to hang out tonight or not? Are we going to eat dinner together tonight or not? Are we going to hang out on Sunday or not? And the amount of peace of mind that has produced is unbelievable. I'm never uncertain about when the next time we're going to spend time together is because it's on my calendar. I'm never uncertain about when Kevin and I are going to work on our business because it's on the calendar. I'm never uncertain about when we're going to record our episodes because it's on the calendar. And so a lot of people think that the calendar is overwhelming. No, not having a calendar is overwhelming. Not having a calendar is when you're constantly in reactive mode, taking random phone calls. And the NLU team, Kevin, Emilia, they know this. I put everything on my calendar that is in my critical vital few, my essentials, my critical numbers is what I call them. And so if you don't use a calendar and you've told yourself the story that a calendar is going to make your life more overwhelming, not less, trust me, everyone who gets used to using a calendar, it makes their life far less overwhelming because it creates far more certainty. Imagine if you and your intimate partner, even in relationship talks, we do this. Imagine if you always knew when you were going to get to spend quality time with your intimate partner. Think about how much uncertainty would go away. Oh, no worries that we're not hanging out tonight. I know that we're hanging out on at Thursday at 4. It creates the peace of mind you need to give yourself that guilt-free solitude time. And that's my point is if you're not using a calendar, it's probably causing more overwhelm than you realize.
What's a good... So number one, anytime you end up on the A Lazaros 88 calendar, it's check that off. It's like, this is going to be a good week. I made it. I made the cut this week. What advice would you give? Because you're the one who helped me do it. I did not want anything to do with the calendar. Like, this isn't what I don't want to be a podcaster so I can run by a calendar. I'm trying to do some stuff and have cool conversations. What advice would you give to somebody who says, not for me, not going to do that?
You got to look at the way, this is the advice that I would give. Ask yourself what you want to achieve. Ask yourself what quality of life that you want. And again, of course, I'm going to go to deeper understanding. The most valuable asset you have is time. And I'll tell you from experience, again, the 53 different people that I'm, helping to maximize their potential. The ones who are the best with their time are going to be the most successful. They're going to be the most fulfilled. They're going to have the best relationships. Everything comes down to how effective you can be in a short amount of time. And that's what I would say is look around you and look at the quality of life that the people around you have, and then connect it to how well they use their time. Everyone right now, just think of someone who just really squanders their time. They're not very productive. They are kind of always distracted. They're always on social media or always messaging you back right away when you message them. And then ask yourself the honest, sincere question of how successful is this person going to be in 10 years? I've done this with many clients before. It's a fundamental. It's impossible to be extremely successful and extremely fulfilled and extremely fit and extremely well-rounded and extremely well-developed without being effective with your time. It's not a thing. And now ask yourself the opposite question. Who's the most fulfilled, successful person you know? Think of that person. The most extraordinary person you know, and they're fulfilled and they're happy. They're not fake happy. They're actually really fulfilled. How good are they with their time? I'd be willing to bet they use a calendar. You just have to understand the downside of not using a calendar. And when you didn't want to use a calendar, Kev, trust me, if I had said, hey, you'll be a millionaire if you do, you'd have done it the next day. I just didn't know how to communicate that.
I would eat a potato chip bag of Beatles if that made me a millionaire faster. So I would definitely use a calendar for sure. This one I'm excited to talk about because I think 2022 is the year of this for many, many, many people. So imagine this. You're juggling a bunch of things. The Beatles. You like the Beatles?
I did. That was fun. Yeah. That was good.
You're juggling a bunch of things and somebody reaches out to you and says, hey, come do this on this day. And in your mind, you're thinking, not going to do that. I don't want to do that. No, definitely don't want to do that. But for some reason, your fingers text, I'm in, or, yep, I'll be there. So if you start setting boundaries, I do believe that will help so much because I think a lot of our overwhelm is actually the fact that we're not aligned. See, doing things that are hard, doing things that stretch you, that are in alignment with the best version of yourself, that is fulfilling. But doing something overwhelming that is taking you out of alignment or that you regret doing every single time, that's even worse because that burns you out. I'll never forget, I was working with my buddy on his house at the very similar time to the one I spoke earlier, and somebody messaged me and said, hey, do you want to come hang out? And it was like an hour and a half drive. And as much as I wanted to do that, I realized that if I said yes to that and I didn't say yes to myself, that was going to make things worse. And this is the problem too. When you do things from a state of overwhelm with people that you care about, you're not yourself. Tarryn and I did a bunch of housework yesterday. And at the end of the night, I said, hey, sorry I was kind of a dick today. And she said, I'm sorry that I was kind of one also. The point was we were both overwhelmed and we kind of took it out on each other. Now, we communicated through it and everything was wonderful. But if you're overwhelmed and you're taking on more stuff that you don't necessarily want to do, I didn't want to do laundry, I didn't want to do dishes, I didn't want to vacuum, then my state showed that. There's a good opportunity that you're probably going to have some negative interactions with people if you're doing things just to please them. So this is my theme for 2022. Set boundaries. It's going to help you with everything. It's going to help you with overwhelm. It's going to help you with fulfillment, with alignment, with friendships, with relationships, with self-worth, with self-love. It will definitely help you when it comes to overwhelm as well, because that might be a habit of yours. If you're a people pleaser, think about this for a second. Even if you are burning down, you will say yes to something because that's what you pride yourself. That's your identity. That's what you've always done. And if it's not serving you, 2022 is the year to get rid of that shit.
Strong work.
Hey, man.
Strong
Thanks.
work. Fired
Appreciate
up.
that.
Get
Fired
rid
up.
of that shit.
Get rid of that shit.
I love it. So I'm on the phone with a client not long ago. This was this past Saturday. And this person is telling me how overwhelmed they are. They're selling their home. They're moving. They've got kids. They've got pets. It's very cold. It's winter. Lots of things going on. And this person, we did what's called a next level life map, which is taking someone's entire priority list and then trying to trim the rose bush, trying to figure out what's feeding you, what's bleeding you, and what's neutral, and how to maximize what's feeding you. Persons, places, things, and ideas. And we ended up doing something that I refer to as the 3 buckets. This is not to be confused with the 5 buckets. The 3 buckets of concern. And I actually learned this from one of our clients, one of our podcast clients, John Laredo. He came on to one of our masterminds a long time ago, and he talked about the 3 buckets of concern. The first one is things that you actually have control over. What you say, what you think, what you feel, what you do, and what you believe. And also what you don't say, don't think, don't feel, don't do, and don't believe. That is what you have control over. One of the reasons some people are so overwhelmed is because they are concerning themselves with things they have no control over. Second bucket, things you have influence over. I cannot control what Kevin thinks. I cannot control what he does. I cannot control what he says or what he believes, but I can influence it. I can raise his awareness. I can help him have a deeper understanding. I can throw in an appropriate joke. I'm kidding.
You can tell him there's money involved.
If there's money involved, I can certainly influence him. But that's the bucket of influence. The third bucket is the no control bucket. The things you have absolutely zero influence and zero control over. So what do you have control over? Yourself. Take responsibility for that. Do what you can. Spend most of your time and your energy and your money on things you have control over. That is your responsibility. Second thing, 20% of your time, energy, and money can go into things you can influence. Influence community, influence charity, influence business partner, influence your intimate partner, influence people, be a coach, a mentor, a guide, anything. Your kids. Third bucket, try really hard to minimize the amount of time that you spend concerning yourself with things you have no control over. This client, to circle back, likes to watch the news sometimes, and there's a lot going on in their country that is very concerning. But most of it he has zero control over. And he's concerning a lot of his time and attention on things that he has no control over. Of course, he's going to feel super overwhelmed. And so that was the homework for this next 2 weeks for him. It was try to get more of your time and attention on the things you do have control over. On your marriage, on your kids, on yourself, on your fitness, on your house improvement before you sell it. And that's what I'm telling everyone here as well. How much of your time, energy, and money is spent on things you have absolutely no control over? That's what anxiety is. It's uncertainty, massive uncertainty. And a lot of the uncertainty gets worse when you're focused on things that you can't do anything about. It's so important to understand that. Never forget the 3 buckets. Things you have control over, things you have influence over, and things you have no control and no influence over, and try to spend most of your time and energy on the first 2.
When Alan and I travel, we spend most of our time at In-N-Out Burger, particularly if it's on the West Coast travel. And
big fan.
It's very, we say that jokingly, but it's very serious. We will do whatever event we're attending, and then we try to do podcast recordings depending on what we need to do. If we need to record them, we definitely get them done. If we have potential in-person interviewees, then we do that also. But when we're traveling, I don't want to say we do the bare minimum, but we kind of do. We go out there understanding this is a potential loss of momentum because we're going to be doing a lot of other things. And we have changed our routine to determine what is the bare minimum. So the last point, and then Alan, I'll let you hammer quick and then we'll go to Q&A. Change your minimums. If you're overwhelmed, do not expect to have the same level of output. So when Alan and I travel, I do not get 100% of my PPT. I do not do my 23 habits a day. I'm just trying to get through the day. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to do the bare minimum. Now, understand, as long as the bare minimum is more this time than it was last time, you're still trending up, and that's wonderful. And then on the back end, and we joke about this too, when Alan and I get out of the airport, I tell Alan, I say, do not call me, do not text me today or tomorrow, depending on when it is. And I tell Tarryn the same thing. Hey, please don't plan anything for us when I get back. I need to do nothing. I need to recoup. So going back to the light at the end of the tunnel, that's a part of this too. If there's a light at the end of the tunnel, make sure you're pointed that way and focused on it. But change, if you can, change your bare minimums that make sure it lines up with what you're actually doing in terms of the output. Because you're going to burn out if you're doing way more than you have. You're going to be overwhelmed. At least if you can say, okay, you know what? I'm building this part of the house. I'm not going to build this part. Or I'm doing this, so I'm not going to focus here. Again, you can do this in spurts and seasons for sure, but it definitely helps us, particularly when we're traveling or when other things are going on, right? If the business is doing really, really well and I don't get to the gym for a day or two because I have to lower that and say, and again, this is a fine line, but there's just too much going on. Right now, I cannot do that. That's okay sometimes, as long as it doesn't become your normal, but your bare minimum can change and will change as you do.
If you could only have everyone take away one thing from this live podcast before we jump to Q&A, one sentence each, what would be your one sentence?
Overwhelm is not the enemy. Leveling up your capability is the goal.
Mine's very similar. It's you're not the only one who deals with overwhelm. Everyone does. Instead of focusing on that, focus on how to be more effective and focus on the essentials.
Do you want to hammer your last point quickly, or do you want to do
No,
Q&A?
good to go, man.